What's up guys, welcome back to the channel. So we got another day of working on the Disney Princess Mustang go-kart. So we got an axle, we got brakes, sort of. We got an engine, it's not hooked up. But there's one thing we're missing. Well, there's a lot of things we're missing, but we're also missing all the steering components. As you can see, these tires, they're not hooked up to anything. So that's what we're gonna be working on today. Let's get this body off so we can see what we're working with. Here's the steering assembly that came out of our donor cart. The steering wheel was up here, this bracket was towards the front of the cart, and as you turn the steering wheel, it just spins that little bracket around, turning your wheels. Now this thing is pretty tore apart. You can see it broke here, 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 and here. Now lucky for us, we're not gonna be needing most of this bracket, so I'm gonna cut these both support pieces off the sides, and then I'm gonna cut this front bracket somewhere in this area. Now all these steering parts up here do tie in and are held in place by this bracket, so I do want to keep most of this intact. If I do need to cut this shorter, I may cut all these welds out and build my own little bracket to hold everything, but for now, I'm cutting it here. So that big bracket's cut off. It is pretty ugly, but we'll clean that up. Now I am running into the first issue where this bracket has to be in this orientation. So when you turn the wheel left, it's pushing this over, which is pulling that left wheel in. That's how we turn left. Now what I wanted to do was flip this thing the whole way around like this, but now when I turn left, it's pushing that left wheel out, which would cause it to turn right. Now where this currently sits, we can see that these tie rod ends are nowhere even close to being lined up with these little steering brackets. So this thing needs to go forward, which means all this has to be cut off. Now another issue we're gonna run into is in order to keep the clearance between this little pivot arm here and that engine, we're probably gonna have to keep this kind of low, and these little tie rod ends are gonna have to be at an upward angle. I don't think that's gonna affect anything as long as we don't have that angle too extreme. We'll have to cross that bridge when we get there. And since we narrowed the wheelbase of this vehicle, these are gonna have to get cut down, but these are actually made out of plastic and they're bent. I don't like these being plastic, so I might try to find some aluminum rod and thread that instead. Now I will be disassembling this. There's some plastic components in it that I think I wanna try to get out. I don't wanna melt any of that when I'm cutting this and putting some heat onto it. And then I'm also gonna be removing these guys here because they're just in the way. Alright, so I got both of these brackets cut off and cleaned up. I also cut down this piece a little bit. Now since the go-kart frame's sitting on the sawhorse, I know that that is the absolute lowest point I want this bracket to go. If I have this bracket lower than the frame, there's a good chance that as I'm riding this thing, this bracket's gonna catch a ton of stuff and get hung up, and it could possibly break off. But if I have this flush, hopefully if I hit something, it'll just scrape and keep on rolling. I'm gonna have to play around with this whole thing and see how this whole steering thing needs to be spaced off of this tube, because I don't want this pivot point here in the steering to be too steep. If it gets too steep, it's gonna bind up and it won't turn. So this needs to have a good angle where it's nice and smooth the whole way throughout, which means I'm gonna have to figure out a good distance to space this off. Now I'm gonna be leaving it off there for the night. It got late on me and I need dinner. So I will see you guys in the morning. Man, is it good to be back working on the go-kart. So it has actually been several months since I've worked on this thing. Other projects have just gotten in the way. So I gotta try to remember what the heck I was gonna do. All right, so here's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking I need to get this tube right in here, and that'll give me that perfect distance, and I'll be able to stitch weld this across the top to that other tube. And then I got this piece here, which I'm gonna cut this tube out, and I'm gonna cut this tube so that it comes across. It'll get stitch welded across the back, and there'll be another support piece that comes off the bottom. Now I have absolutely no idea if that made any sense to you, but let me get this piece cut out and I'll show you exactly what I mean. So we got that piece notched out pretty good. Now comes the fun part of replicating that over here. I think I just got lucky. That wasn't as bad as I thought. So now I'm going to be cutting this piece in half. That other piece, I'm going to cut it in half. And then I found this piece here. It's like a pin. I have no idea what that's off of, but that's what I'm going to be using to sleeve the two pieces together. Alrighty, here's what we're working with, and I am going to keep this down low and in line with this part of the frame. The engine steps up a little bit, but I like this down low. That way, if I do hit something on the bottom, like a rock or something, it's going to hit this bar, which is going to be way stronger than the steering components. So that'll just help protect things. Now I have this bracket, and this is where the steering bearing goes in. So this is going to have to be modified. I want it to sit a little bit closer. And then we have our whole steering assembly here. And there used to be a tube that sat right in this notch, which that's not going to be able to work anymore. So we're going to have to modify this somehow to get this mounted onto the frame. But the first thing we got to do is get this chamfered down and get this ready to weld, and then we'll weld that the whole way around, and then we'll tack this into the vehicle. Everything's nice and tacked in. Now I went ahead and assembled this whole steering. I got the bearing in here again. And it looks like when we butt this up, we'll be able just to cut a little semicircle and get this welded onto here. And then we should also be able to run a weld along the bottom. That'll give it a lot of strength. And then we'll have to decide some sort of plate system off of here. Now this bearing bracket is tacked into place. Now I'm going to get the rest of the steering components in and show you what we're working with. And the angle of our steering is really good. We're not binding up on anything. I was worried about this joint binding up. And there's also this little stop right here, and that's going to stop our steering perfectly. So it's going to bottom out on that and not let us overextend our steering. And the last thing we need to do is attach this bracket here to the frame. So I'm going to be using some CAD, some cardboard aided design, and I'm going to create a plate that's going to come over here, it's going to come down, and it's going to wrap around, and I'm going to weld that plate in here to this bracket. That way this whole assembly is attached to the frame. Little pieces are made. Now we're just going to weld them to these brackets and get this whole thing tacked on. Dang, look at that. So our steering works phenomenally. But I'm sitting here and I just realized that I didn't weld underneath here, so I'm out of time for this week, but next week I'll probably cut these back off, and then I'll weld this seam out, then I will tack this back in place. I want to have that fully welded underneath, and I jumped the gun and I tacked that in, but the concept worked. Next weekend we'll deal with that issue, get that fixed, and then we also need to get this support in here for the steering column, and then we got to connect the tires to the whole steering thing. I mean, that's the whole point, right? Oh man, so it is the next weekend. Mistakes were made, so I'm gonna be taking all this steering stuff off, breaking off these two components, then I'm gonna weld this joint and get it back on, and we'll be right back where we were. So let's get that done. So I got this thing back to where I started. The steering components are back in again. Everything's working nice and smooth. So now I'm gonna throw the U-joints in, and then we're gonna figure out how long we need to make those little tie rod ends, the little connector piece that goes in between here. All right, so I got my Heim joints in. Now this tire I eyeballed with the other one and it looks relatively straight, so I believe this is about the distance we need. Here's the original steering piece. It's made out of plastic and it's obviously gonna be way too long since we cut the frame down and shrunk it. So what I'm gonna do is make a test piece out of this. I'm gonna cut it, drill it, and re-tap it. But the final product is gonna be made out of this aluminum rod. I want this to be made out of aluminum since it's gonna be significantly stronger, but I may as well test it out on this piece of plastic and make sure I get that distance right. That way I just don't waste any aluminum. All right guys, check that out. The steering is coming together. So the only issue I'm seeing is this plastic rod is bottoming out right here. Now the aluminum rod I purchased is smaller in diameter. Aluminum is much stronger than plastic, so I shrunk the diameter. It doesn't have to be as beefy. So I'm thinking if that doesn't clear it, just that smaller diameter in itself, we may just weld a little tack on the end of these stops and just bump them out maybe an 1/8 of an inch or so. I think that's all we really need to stop that. So we are gonna make this steering radius a little bit smaller, but that shouldn't be an issue. So now I just gotta duplicate this on this side. Just wanna mention that this U-joint is reverse thread, this one is regular thread. That way, as I'm turning this clockwise, you are seeing that both of those joints are pulling in, so this is getting smaller. Now if I go counterclockwise, it's pushing both of those joints out and it is extending this whole steering linkage. Everything is finally in and the steering looks pretty good. I think this left side, things might be thrown one way or the other, so I might add a little bit more when I make this final tube, but looking pretty good. Both of these things are still hitting, but that's not an issue. We'll deal with that later. The last thing we need to do is find a way to attach this little bearing here. Now that just holds the steering wheel right in its certain spot. So I'm thinking we'll just probably weld 2 tubes down to the frame and we might even triangulate it just to make it pretty strong. When I go to mount this thing, the tubes are gonna be too narrow. I can't just weld them to these tubes. So I'm gonna have to put a cross member in here and then those vertical tubes will get welded onto that little cross member. Scrap pile's starting to get pretty slim, but I do have this little like roll cage type thing. So I'm thinking that this piece here is gonna fit perfectly in there and it'll give it a little bit of curve and a little bit of, you know, like pizzazz. Got this cross member just loosely fitted in here. Now this steering bracket's gonna sit like this, and then I think we're gonna take one of these pipes and we're probably gonna weld it at an angle like that, and then like I said, we'll triangulate it, we'll throw something from here up to it. I'm gonna take some final measurements and make sure that this steering wheel and this bracket's exactly where I want it. Then I'll start cutting these and cut them to length and get these welded on. Our steering is finally in, nothing crazy is going on. That knuckle is not binding and I can shake it all around. It feels really sturdy. So I'm very happy with how this turned out. Now the more I think about it, the more I don't think I want to triangulate it back, but I might actually go across these steering components and triangulate it up through here. And that'll just open up a lot more room back here because I need to put a fuel tank in this thing and that might just be a good location in between my legs. So I do want to go ahead and take that body and fit it on here and see how everything looks. threw the steering wheel on just to see how everything looks and works. Now there will be a windshield coming up right in here, so you're not going to see a lot of it, and it's not going to look as high and as goofy. At least I hope it won't. Alright guys, that's going to be a wrap on this video. If you are enjoying this build, hit that like and subscribe button, and we're going to be working on the seat next time, so make sure you tune in for that. See you on the next one.